Have you ever wondered what happens when the absolute power of a worldly empire collides with the unshakable will of God? Imagine the scene. Rome, the heart of a vast and ruthless empire, a city of marble and might. An elderly man, the last of his kind, stands accused. He is John, the final living apostle, the last man on earth to have walked with Jesus, to have heard his voice, to have witnessed his resurrection. Before him sits the Emperor Domitian, a man who declared himself a living God, demanding worship from all his subjects. To silence this last, stubborn voice of a rival kingdom, Domitian devises a death of unimaginable cruelty, a public spectacle designed to terrify and extinguish the burgeoning Christian faith forever. He sentences John to be boiled alive in a cauldron of oil. The question that echoes through history is not simply survived, but how? How could a frail human body defy the laws of nature in such a dramatic way? This is not just a story of survival. It is the story of a divine appointment, a testament to a power that a Roman emperor could not comprehend, and a love that could not be quenched by fire or by death. The stage for this divine confrontation was set. Tradition holds that this took place before a massive crowd near the Latin Gate in Rome, a spectacle designed for maximum impact. The sentence was public, the method was brutal, and the message was clear. Defy the God Emperor, and you will be erased in the most agonizing way imaginable. The great cauldron was brought forth, the oil heated until it seethed and bubbled, its waves of heat distorting the very air. The guards, hardened soldiers of the empire, seized the aged apostle. John, a man nearly a century old, showed no fear. His serenity was, in itself, an act of defiance. He walked toward his execution with a peace that unsettled his captors. He carried within him a promise, a knowledge that his life was not his own to lose, but God's to keep. As he was cast into the scalding liquid, a hush must have fallen over the bloodthirsty crowd. They expected screams. They expected the gruesome final throes of a tortured man. Instead, they witnessed the impossible. The boiling oil, a substance that should have instantly destroyed flesh and bone, had no effect. John stood in the cauldron not as a victim, but as a victor. The oil became like a refreshing bath, and the apostle emerged not only unharmed but seemingly rejuvenated, his body completely untouched by the searing heat. The miracle was undeniable, public, and terrifying. The power on display was not Roman, it was heavenly. For Emperor Domitian, this was a catastrophic failure. His attempt to demonstrate his absolute authority had backfired in the most spectacular way. He had intended to make John an example of his power, but instead, God had made Domitian an example of his. Fear gripped the emperor. This was not a man he could kill. This prisoner was protected by a God far greater than any in the Roman pantheon, and certainly greater than Domitian himself. He could not allow this living miracle to remain in Rome, a walking symbol of the empire's impotence against the Christians' God. To truly understand how a man could face such a fate with serene confidence, we must journey back in time, long before the Roman Colosseum and the imperial court. We must return to the sun-drenched shores of the Sea of Galilee. Here we find a young man, a fisherman, working alongside his brother James and his father Zebedee. This was John before he was the beloved disciple, before he was the theologian. He was a man of passion, a fierce loyalty, and perhaps a fiery temper. It is no coincidence that Jesus gave him and his brother the Aramaic nickname, Boanerges, which means sons of thunder. This name suggests a personality that was impetuous, zealous, and perhaps even prone to ambition and anger. This was the raw material God chose to work with. His journey was not one of instantaneous perfection, but of profound transformation. From the very beginning, John was part of an exclusive inner circle. Alongside Peter and James, he was chosen by Jesus to witness moments of divine revelation that were hidden from the others. He stood on the Mount of Transfiguration, seeing Jesus in his glorified state, conversing with Moses and Elijah, a glimpse of the heavenly kingdom that would one day be fully revealed to him. He was in the house of Jairus when Jesus raised the little girl from the dead, a first-hand witness to Christ's power over death itself. This proximity to Jesus was not accidental, it was a divine apprenticeship. God was shaping the Son of Thunder into the Apostle of Love. Just as God told the prophet Jeremiah, "Before I formed you in the womb I knew you, before you were born I set you apart." So too was John's life a preordained path of preparation for a unique and final purpose. And this fiery nature wasn't just a quaint nickname, it was a reality that burst forth in moments of raw, unrefined zeal. Consider the incident recorded in the Gospel of Luke. Jesus and his disciples were traveling toward Jerusalem and sought to pass through a Samaritan village, but the Samaritans, holding their long-standing animosity towards the Jews, refused them entry. They rejected Jesus. How did John and his brother James react? With understanding? With a plan to find another route? No. They turned to Jesus and asked, "Lord, do you want us to call fire down from heaven to destroy them?" Think about that for a moment. This is the man who would later write, "Whoever does not love does not know God, because God is love." This is the apostle whose epistles are a symphony on the theme of loving one another. Yet here, in this moment of perceived insult to his master, his first instinct is not love, not mercy, but divine annihilation. He was ready to incinerate an entire village. This reveals the Son of Thunder in his rawest form, fiercely loyal, passionate, but also quick to judgment, and with a profound misunderstanding of the nature of Christ's mission. He saw rejection and immediately defaulted to a desire for Old Testament-style retribution, like Elijah on Mount Carmel. He saw the power of God as a weapon to be wielded against enemies, not a balm to be offered for healing the world. Jesus' response was immediate and sharp. He rebuked them, he turned to them and corrected this violent, misguided zeal. The mission was not to destroy lives, but to save them. This moment was a critical lesson for John. It was a mirror held up to his own heart, showing him that his passion, while powerful, was misdirected. It needed to be sanctified, purified in the crucible of Christ's own example of mercy and long-suffering. The fire he needed to call down was not one of literal destruction, but the refining fire of the Holy Spirit upon his own soul. This wasn't the only time his ambition and earthly perspective clashed with the teachings of Jesus. We see it again in the audacious request he and his brother made. Approaching Jesus in private, they asked for the highest places of honor in his coming kingdom. "Grant that in your glory we may sit, one at your right and one at your left." They still envisioned Jesus' kingdom in terms of earthly power, thrones, and prestige. They saw their proximity to the king as a ticket to personal glory. They wanted the reward without fully understanding the cost, the crown without the cross. The other 10 disciples were, quite rightly, indignant. They saw the raw ambition for what it was. Again, Jesus uses this as a profound teaching moment, not just for John and James, but for all of them. He doesn't just say no. He asks them a penetrating question. Can you drink the cup I drink, or be baptized with the baptism I am baptized with? He was speaking of the cup of suffering, the baptism of death that awaited him in Jerusalem. In their youthful confidence they answered, "We can." But they didn't truly grasp what they were saying. Jesus then explained that true greatness in his kingdom is not found in ruling over others as the Gentile rulers do, but in becoming a servant, a slave to all. The Son of Man himself, he explained, did not come to be served but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. These were not easy lessons. They were humbling, ego-crushing corrections. For a son of thunder, accustomed to passion and perhaps a certain pride in his position within the inner circle, being told that his entire framework for greatness was upside down must have been jarring. Yet it was through these rebukes, these patient and loving course corrections from the Master himself, that the transformation was taking place. Every correction was a chisel, chipping away at the hard stone of pride and ambition. Every lesson on mercy was a drop of water, slowly eroding the sharp edges of his judgmental zeal. God was not eliminating the fire in John's soul. He was redirecting it. He was teaching John that the greatest power is not in calling down fire, but in enduring it. The highest honor is not found on a throne beside a king, but at the foot of a cross, serving a world in need. This profound re-education of his soul was the necessary preparation for the man who would stand at the foot of that very cross when almost all others had fled. The man who had received the care of Jesus' own mother, and the man who would, decades later, face a cauldron of boiling oil not with a desire for vengeance, but with the serene and unshakable love of his Savior. This process of refinement and re-education reaches a critical turning point in the final hours of Jesus' earthly ministry. Picture the scene in the upper room. The air is thick with a sense of foreboding, yet also with an unparalleled intimacy. And where is John? He is not jockeying for position anymore. He is the disciple whom Jesus loved, reclining next to the Lord, his head resting near Jesus' breast. This proximity is no longer about status, it's about relationship. It's about a deep, personal affection. The Son of Thunder is learning to listen to the heartbeat of God. In this sacred space, Jesus gives them the lesson that will define the rest of John's life and ministry. A new command I give you: love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. For the man who wanted to incinerate a village that didn't welcome them, this command must have resonated with profound, convicting power. The standard for love was no longer abstract. It was the person right next to him. And then comes the ultimate object lesson in humility, an act so stunning it would have shattered any remaining vestiges of their quest for thrones and glory. Jesus, their Lord and Master, ties a towel around his waist, pours water into a basin and begins to wash their feet. Imagine the shock. Imagine the water, the feel of the rough towel, the sight of the Creator of the universe kneeling on the dirty floor. For John, who had so recently envisioned himself on a throne at Jesus' right hand, this act would have been a complete and total recalibration of reality. This is what greatness looks like. It's not sitting in judgment over others, but kneeling in service before them. It's not about being elevated, but about bending low. The water that washed the dust from his feet was also washing the pride from his soul. This was the true path to glory, the true meaning of the kingdom. All the verbal lessons suddenly became tangible, unforgettable, in the quiet, humble act of a master washing his disciples' feet. Yet, even after such a profound evening, the old human weakness remained. In the Garden of Gethsemane, when Jesus asked his inner circle, Peter, James, and John, to watch and pray with him in his hour of agony, they fell asleep. The same man who had seen the transfiguration, the same John who had just leaned on Jesus' chest, could not stay awake. Their confident declaration, "We can drink the cup," met the hard reality of their own physical and spiritual frailty. When the soldiers came, the Son of Thunder did not call down fire. He did not make a heroic stand. He, along with the others, fled into the night. His passion, his zeal, his loyalty, it all evaporated in a moment of sheer terror. It was a moment of profound failure, a necessary humbling that proved his strength did not come from his own fiery nature, but from his connection to the vine. And this is what makes what happens next so remarkable, because after failing, after running away, John comes back. While Peter is denying Christ from a distance and the others are scattered in fear, John finds his way to the foot of the cross. He is the only one of the 12 who is recorded as being there. What brought him back? Perhaps it was the memory of the upper room. Perhaps the new commandment to love, as Christ loved, compelled him to stay with his friend to the bitter end. He couldn't fight for Jesus, he couldn't save him, but he could love him, he could be present. And in that moment of ultimate darkness and despair, the transformation is sealed. Standing beneath the cross, watching his Lord suffer, John receives his final, most sacred commission. Jesus looks down, sees his mother, and sees the disciple he loves standing beside her. He says to Mary, "Woman, here is your son," and to John, "Here is your mother." In that instant, Jesus entrusts the most precious person in his earthly life to John's care. The Son of Thunder, the ambitious young man who sought a throne, is given not a crown of glory, but a sacred duty of care. He is made a son to a heartbroken mother. His fire is now completely repurposed, not for judgment or for power, but for protective, faithful, steadfast love. He would spend the rest of his life fulfilling that promise, demonstrating that the greatest honor in the kingdom is not to rule, but to love and to serve the ones the king loves. This new identity, forged in the shadow of the cross, is immediately put to the test in the disorienting dawn of the third day. The news from Mary Magdalene that the tomb is empty sends the disciples into a panic. And what happens next is so beautifully, so humanly illustrative of the men involved. Peter and John run. You can almost feel the frantic energy, the pounding feet on the dusty path to the garden tomb. The Gospel, written by John himself, notes a simple fact. The other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. On the surface, it's a detail of youth and speed. But I believe it's much more. John is propelled not just by younger legs, but by a heart desperate for hope, a love that cannot bear the thought of one more violation, one more loss. He has to see. He has to know. But then something remarkable happens that shows the Son of Thunder is truly gone. The old John, the impetuous, ambitious youth, would have stormed into that tomb without a second thought, demanding answers. But this new John, the one who stood at the cross, the one entrusted with the care of Mary, stops at the threshold. He stoops down, peers into the darkness, and simply observes. He sees the linen wrappings lying there, but he waits. There is a new reverence in him, a holy hesitation. He has learned that sacred spaces, even spaces of grief and mystery, are to be entered with humility, not with force. He is no longer trying to seize the kingdom. He is learning to receive it. Of course, Peter, ever the man of action, arrives moments later and, in his typical fashion, charges straight into the tomb. He is driven by his guilt, by his desperate need for redemption after his threefold denial. He needs a grand sign, a dramatic reversal. He sees the same evidence John saw from the doorway. But for Peter, it just adds to the confusion. Then, and only then, does John follow him inside. And the scripture says something profound. He saw, and he believed. What did he see that ignited his faith, even before he saw the risen Jesus? He saw what Peter saw, but he perceived it differently. He saw the linen strips lying flat, empty, as if the body had simply passed through them. And more than that, he saw the face cloth, the asterix Sudarian asterisk that had been wrapped around Jesus' head. It wasn't thrown aside in a hurry, as a grave robber might do. It wasn't lying with the other linens. It was neatly folded, set apart in a place by itself. This is the detail. This is the quiet thunderclap that changes everything for John. In a culture where a servant, upon setting a table for a meal, would wait for the master to finish, the master would signal he was done by wadding up his napkin and tossing it on the table. But if he folded his napkin and set it aside, it was a clear signal. I am not finished. I am coming back. In that folded cloth, John saw not chaos, not theft, not an ending, but a deliberate, intentional, and triumphant message. He saw the character of his Lord. This wasn't a frantic escape from death. It was an orderly, calm, and definitive conquest over it. Death had been defeated so thoroughly that the victor had time to fold the napkin. Peter saw empty cloths and was perplexed. John saw a folded napkin and understood the promise. His heart, now attuned to the frequency of intimate love rather than the roar of overt power, could hear the whisper of the resurrection in the quiet order of an empty tomb. He believed not because of a display of celestial fire, but because of a gesture of divine intention. This was the new language he had learned at the foot of the cross, that God's greatest power is often revealed in his most personal, gentle, and loving details. This is the great divergence in the spiritual path, the fork in the road of faith. It's the difference between knowing about God and simply knowing God. Peter knew a lot about Jesus. He knew the prophecies, he knew the teachings, he had witnessed the miracles. His mind was full of data points, but his heart was full of static. The static of his own failure, his own expectations, his own idea of what a Messiah should be, and what a follower ought to do. He ran to the tomb looking for a data point that would fix his broken equation. An empty tomb was a variable he couldn't place. It didn't compute. So he stood there, marveling, which is a word for being intellectually stunned but spiritually unmoved. John, on the other hand, ran to the tomb not to solve a puzzle, but to find a person. His quest wasn't intellectual, it was relational. The cross had not been a theological problem for him to solve. It had been the place where he watched his dearest friend die. He wasn't there to analyze the evidence of the resurrection. He was there to mourn the absence of his Lord. And because his heart was so completely oriented toward the person of Jesus, he could recognize his signature, his personal touch, in the smallest of details. He wasn't looking for proof of a doctrine. He was looking for a sign of his friend. And he found it. That folded napkin was like a private note left on the pillow, a gesture whose meaning is only truly understood by someone who knows the sender intimately. It said, "Everything is okay. I am who I have always been. The order and peace you knew in me has not been conquered by the chaos of the world. I am coming back for you." We all have our empty tombs, don't we? The places in our lives where something we cherished, a relationship, a career, a dream, a sense of security, has died and been taken away, and we stand before them, confused and grieving. Our first instinct is often the Petrine one. We rush in, demanding answers. We look for a grand sign, an earthquake, a voice from heaven that will explain the loss and restore our certainty. We want God to show up with a celestial spreadsheet that justifies the pain and proves He's still in control. We sift through the evidence of our lives, the linen wrappings of our past successes and failures, and we just become more perplexed. We see the emptiness, and it confirms our fear that all is lost. But the Johannine path invites us to do something different. It invites us to pause at the threshold, to quiet the panicked voice of our own guilt and fear, and to simply look with the eyes of love. It asks us to stop searching for the grand explanation, and instead to look for the small, folded napkin, to look for the quiet, intentional sign of God's character in the midst of the mess. What does that look like for us? It might be the unexpected kindness of a stranger on the worst day of your life. It might be a sudden, unexplainable peace that settles on your heart in the middle of a sleepless night. It could be a line of scripture you've read 100 times that suddenly ignites with personal meaning. It's the friend who calls at the exact moment you needed them, not with answers, but just with presence. These are not coincidences. They are folded napkins. They are quiet, deliberate signals from the Master, left in the tomb of our despair that say, "This is not the end. I have not abandoned you. I am not finished with this story. I am coming back." The world, and even our own inner Peter, will dismiss these things as insignificant, as wishful thinking. But the heart that has learned to rest in love, the heart that has learned the rhythm of grace, recognizes the signature. It sees the gesture and believes, not because all its questions have been answered, but because it has been reminded of the one it loves. This is how faith moves from the head to the heart. It's when we stop demanding that God prove Himself with power, and we start learning to see Him in the details, in the gentle, orderly, and loving way He conquers the chaos. He is always folding the napkin. The question is whether we have the eyes of the heart to see it. And this practice, this cultivation of Johannine sight, is crucial because the Petrine impulse is so deeply ingrained in us. It's the voice of survival. It's the part of us that built civilizations, that solves equations, that strives and achieves. We honor that impulse, and we should. But it has its limits. When you're standing at the edge of a grave, calculation fails. When your heart is broken, a 5-point plan for recovery feels like an insult. Peter's frantic energy inside the tomb found nothing but absence. He saw the discarded grave clothes and concluded, "They have taken the Lord." His logic led him to a conclusion based on the evidence at hand: theft and desecration. His mind, working as it was designed to, could only process the scene as a violation, an ending. John, however, saw the same evidence but perceived a different story. The folded napkin wasn't just a detail, it was a grammar. It was a sentence spoken in the language of the one he loved. In that culture, a servant, after setting a table for his master, would clear it away. But if the master intended to return, he would fold his napkin and leave it on the table as a sign. It was a quiet promise: "I am not finished here. I will be back." John, whose identity in his own gospel is simply the disciple whom Jesus loved, recognized the language of his master. He didn't see a crime scene, he saw a promise. He saw an intimate gesture of order and intention in the very epicenter of chaos and death. And he believed. Not because he understood how, but because he recognized nigh who. This is a profound shift for us. It means that in our own moments of emptiness, our goal isn't necessarily to understand the tau or the why-itas of our loss. The Petrine demand for a full, logical explanation will often leave us exhausted and more desolate than before. The Johannine invitation is to look for the asterisk who, to look for the character of God, the signature of the Master, in the details. Maybe your empty tomb is a financial crisis. The Petrine impulse is to run spreadsheets, to panic, to work 100-hour weeks, to try and control every variable. The Johannine posture is to do the work that is necessary, yes, but also to pause at the threshold and look for the folded napkin, to notice the meal a friend brings over, unasked, to feel gratitude for the roof still over your head for one more night, to see the resilience in your own spirit that you didn't know you had. These aren't just sentimental platitudes. They are evidence of a deeper reality. They are the signature of a master who has not abandoned the table, but has simply stepped away for a moment, promising to return. Or perhaps your empty tomb is a diagnosis, the news that changes everything. Peter in us wants to scour the internet for every possible outcome, to second-guess every doctor, to fight and rage against the perceived injustice of it all. And that fight is valid, it is human. But the Johannine heart, even in the midst of that terror, can stoop down and see the folded napkin. It's the nurse who holds your hand with genuine compassion. It's the surprising beauty of a sunrise on the morning of a difficult treatment. It's the sudden memory of a past trial you overcame, a reminder of your own strength. These details don't negate the pain. The folded napkin didn't erase the horror of the crucifixion, but it reframes the narrative. It suggests that the chaos is not the final word. It whispers that there is an order, a purpose, a loving intention that is still at work, even when it is hidden from our frantic, logical sight. It tells us that the tomb is not a prison, but a passageway. This Johannine way of seeing is not a form of denial. It is not pretending the tomb is not empty, or that the loss isn't devastatingly real. John still felt the absence of Jesus. The grief was a physical weight. But his faith allowed him to see two truths at once: the truth of the absence and the truth of the promise. He held the reality of the pain in one hand and the evidence of God's character in the other. This is the spiritual maturity we are invited into, to be able to stand in the wreckage of our lives, to acknowledge the full extent of the damage, and yet still have the quiet clarity to spot the folded napkin. Consider the empty tomb of a broken relationship, a marriage that ends, a friendship that fractures, a child who walks away. The Petrine impulse is to rush into the tomb and see only chaos. We see the discarded grave clothes of shared memories, now just painful reminders. We frantically search for clues, for the one thing we said or did wrong, for a logical reason that can explain the inexplicable pain of abandonment. We become detectives of our own sorrow, replaying conversations, pointing fingers, trying to piece together a narrative of blame, because a narrative of blame at least feels like we have some control. But the Johannine heart kneels at the entrance. It weeps, yes. It acknowledges the finality of the closed door. But then, it looks for the signature of the master. And what does it find? Perhaps the folded napkin is the hard-won self-knowledge that came from the relationship's end. It's the sudden, profound understanding of your own resilience. It's the compassion you now have for others in similar pain, a compassion you could never have learned otherwise. It's the realization that your capacity to love has not been destroyed, but perhaps has even been deepened by the breaking. The folded napkin is the quiet whisper that says, "This table is cleared, but the feast is not over. I am preparing a new place for you." Or think about the tomb of a professional failure. The business you poured your life into collapses. The career path you thought was your destiny hits a dead end. The dream you organized your entire identity around dissolves. Peter runs in, seeing only the mess, the debt, the shame, the wasted years, the brutal judgment of the world. He sees his own failure as the only thing left in the tomb. He sees the grave clothes of his former identity and believes that is all he ever was. But John pauses. He looks past the obvious wreckage. He sees the folded napkin. What is it? It's the integrity with which you conducted yourself, even when things were falling apart. It's the loyalty of the one colleague who still calls to check in on you. It's the unexpected freedom that comes with no longer having to carry the weight of that specific ambition, a freedom that is terrifying but also full of possibility. It is the quiet, orderly sign that this specific work is complete. Not a failure, but complete. The master has finished this course and has folded the napkin, signaling that he is not done with you. He is just moving you to a different part of the banquet. This is not easy. Cultivating a Johannine heart in a Petrine world is a daily act of rebellion. Our culture screams at us to be Peter. To act, to fix, to analyze, to control, to demand answers. To be busy is to be important. To have a 5-year plan is to be responsible. To grieve is to be weak. To wait is to be passive. But the path of faith, the path of true seeing, often requires us to be John. To be still. To be observant. To look for the subtle language of God in the quiet details of our lives. It means trusting that order can exist in the heart of chaos, that intention can be found in the middle of tragedy, and that a folded cloth can be a more powerful sign of life than a legion of angels. It is a faith that is not based on empirical proof, but on intimate recognition. John believed because the folded napkin was so perfectly, so characteristically, Jesus. It was a gesture of peace and order in a moment when the world would expect only panic and despair. And so we must ask ourselves in our own empty tombs, what here is characteristically God? Where is the signature of love, of order, of quiet intention in the middle of my mess? This search for God's signature is the very heart of the spiritual discipline. It's a conscious turning away from the deafening noise of the Petrine panic inside of us. Peter's heart cries out, "What am I going to do now?" It's a question centered on self, on action, on regaining control. John's heart, however, asks a different question. It whispers, "What has he done here? And what is he doing next?" The shift is subtle, but it is everything. It moves the focus from our frantic activity to his divine agency. It exchanges the burden of fixing for the peace of watching. Consider the empty tomb of a long-held belief system that no longer holds. The intellectual framework you built your life on comes crashing down. A crisis of faith. Peter rushes in and sees only apostasy, confusion, the terrifying void of meaninglessness. He sees the discarded grave clothes of old doctrines and feels naked, exposed, and lost. The temptation is to frantically search for a new system, a new set of grave clothes to wrap himself in, anything to cover the emptiness. But John pauses. He sees the folded napkin. Perhaps it's a single, resilient truth that remains, a simple belief in love or goodness that endured the earthquake. Perhaps it's the quiet integrity of a friend who lives out their faith without needing all the answers. It's the sudden humbling realization that God is infinitely larger than the box you had built for him. The folded napkin is the peaceful acknowledgement that this particular understanding is complete, and God is inviting you into a deeper, more mysterious, and more authentic relationship with him, one not based on intellectual certainty but on trusting presence. Or what about the tomb of our own strength, the moment we are forced to confront our absolute powerlessness? A chronic illness, an addiction, the slow decline of a loved one. Peter rages against the bars of the tomb. He fights, he strategizes, he bargains, he exhausts every ounce of his energy trying to reverse the irreversible. He sees only the defeat, the weakness, the grave clothes of his former capable self. He defines the entire experience by what has been lost. But John, in his stillness, sees the folded napkin. It is the grace found in surrender. It is the unexpected intimacy that blossoms when you finally allow someone to care for you. It is the clarity that comes when all the non-essential things are stripped away and you are left with what truly matters. It is the discovery of a deeper, more resilient strength that isn't about physical power or control, but about the capacity to endure, to love, and to receive love in the midst of breaking. The folded napkin is the quiet sign that the Master has finished with the illusion of your self-sufficiency and is now ready to teach you the profound power found in dependence on him and on others. This is why intimacy with the Master is non-negotiable if we want to cultivate a Johannine heart. John knew Jesus. He had leaned against his chest. He had heard the rhythm of his heart. He knew his mannerisms, the way he moved, the way he brought order to chaos, with a quiet word or a gentle touch. The folded napkin was not just a random clue. It was a personal message that John's heart, tuned to the frequency of Jesus' own, could immediately recognize. Without that intimacy, the napkin is just a piece of cloth. The details are just details. The chaos is just chaos. But with intimacy, the details become a language. The quiet moments become conversations. The folded napkin becomes a promise. We cannot hope to see his signature in the wreckage of our lives if we have not first spent time learning his handwriting in the quiet, ordinary moments. We learn his handwriting by reading his words, yes, but more so by sitting in silence with him, by walking through our days with a constant, low-level awareness of his presence, by practicing gratitude, by listening more than we speak. This practice of looking for the napkin is, in essence, a retraining of our vision. It's like an artist learning to see not just the objects in a room, but the negative space between them, the way the light falls, the subtle shifts in color. At first, it's difficult. Our eyes are drawn to the big, dramatic Petrine things, the empty space, the discarded clothes, the sheer fact of the absence. We have to consciously choose to look for the smaller, quieter sign of intention. We have to ask, where is the one small point of inexplicable peace in this storm? Where is the moment of unearned grace? Where is the surprising pattern in this apparent randomness? Think of the parent whose child has gone astray, breaking their heart. The tomb is gaping. Peter sees only the rebellion, the broken communication, the fear for their future. The grave clothes are the memories of a sweet child now seemingly gone forever. And the grief is overwhelming. But John, even through tears, might look for the folded napkin. Maybe it's a brief text message from the child on a holiday, a small sign they are still connected, however tenuously. Maybe it's the strength the parent discovers in a support group with other parents walking a similar path. Maybe it's the profound, painful, but ultimately freeing release of control, entrusting their child to a love greater than their own. The folded napkin isn't a magical solution. It doesn't erase the pain, but it is the signature of God whispering, "I am still here. This story is not finished. My work of redemption is quiet, orderly, and it is happening even where you cannot see it." It shifts the focus from the horror of the problem to the hope of the presence. So I'll leave you with this to ponder, and I hope you'll share your answer in the comments below. In the middle of whatever empty tomb you might be facing, what is that one folded napkin, that quiet, inexplicable signature of hope that you can point to? If these conversations help you retrain your spiritual vision, be sure to subscribe and click that notification bell so you don't miss our next one. And please, go ahead and watch the video I have queued up for you right here. Until next time, friends, keep looking. This is Marco.